Welcome everyone to the Naturalist Training, focusing on nature interpretation for the rest of us. This is our fourth online training event, and previously we've included how to further your use of iNaturalist and critters that live on oak leaves. You can find past recordings on our YouTube channel, and this presentation I'm really excited about because my colleague Michael Hawk will share how to transform nature moments into nature journeys. Hi, my name is Deb Kramer, and I'm the founder and executive director of Keep Coyote Creek Beautiful, and I'll be your moderator today. I hope you're as excited as I am to see how it is that we can all be better at sharing our passion for nature. And I've been fortunate to be bit by the nature bug when I was young and have been hiking, backpacking, and gardening ever since. And over the past 8 years, Keep Coyote Creek Beautiful has hosted 78 BioBlitz events that have increased my appreciation for nature. Thanks to the docents at these events, I look at nature so differently now. So let me tell you a bit about Keep Coyote Creek Beautiful. We are a community-based organization that sees Coyote Creek as a resilient ecosystem for all living things to enjoy. We engage, educate, and encourage people by bringing communities together to take action for, learn about, and play along a healthy Coyote Creek. We host creek cleanups, BioBlitz events, backpacking, nature walks, all sorts of fun outdoorsy things. And we also have classroom education and projects that we do with college students. In today's training, we're fortunate to have both Marav Von Schack from the BioBlitz Club and Michael Hawk from Jumpstart Nature to talk about how and why we share our passion for nature. Michael's presentation will help you learn to make any nature topic engaging. You'll also learn how to connect with your audience and turn experiences into the beginning of a journey of discovery. But first, I'd like to introduce Marav. She'll talk a bit about BioBlitz events and why they are so impactful. She founded BioBlitz Club, a community science organization, to encourage people to get outside and learn about nature. Through this group's actions over the nearly past 8 years and over 100 events, she's had nearly 2,000 people participate and contribute to the growing body of knowledge about nature through iNaturalist. Before I turn it over to her, let's get your best Zoom experience. So first of all, make sure that your audio is on mute. Turn off your video. Set your video layout to speaker mode and full screen. And then any questions that you have, please put them in the chat, and we'll go through the chat and maybe ask some questions to Michael as things come up. So I'm going to turn it over to Marav now.
Okay. Thanks, Deb. And
welcome.
Hi, everyone. Okay. Yeah. Can you hear me and see me?
Yes.
Awesome. Okay. So let me quickly share my screen. I just want to talk for, I don't know, 5 minutes max.
10 minutes.
What's that?
For how long?
Okay. I guess there's a background conversation. Okay. So I just want to briefly talk about why we're here today, why we're going to talk about this stuff. Because it's just so wonderful to share our passion, our love for nature with others. And that's why I founded BioBlitz Club and why I organize all these events with Deb and with the other groups, because I just love sharing that with, I mean, look at their expressions. And it's just so wonderful. Looking at kids engaging with nature, our docents listening to an earthworm moving on paper, sharing what we do with so many different people is just wonderful. And when we do our events, we obviously have many participants, but we wouldn't be able to do it without our docents. Our docents are key component in this equation. And what do our docents do? So usually what we'll do is we'll have a small group of people go out with one or often two docents, and the docents will share Some of their knowledge, but mostly their passion. Okay, when you become a docent, you don't need to know everything. None of us know everything. It's more about the excitement and the joy of being outside, looking for creatures. How do you find creatures? When you walk slowly, when you listen to birds, when you look around for different plants. And it's just a wonderful experience to walk in any random place, like a campus or a nature preserve, and being able to show people all sorts of creatures that they haven't seen before. Yeah, so these are some of our docents doing just that. And again, you don't need to be an expert. You just need to come with that excitement and a little bit of knowledge, and then you can share all that with your group. Show them a little bit how to use the app, which is super easy, and then just go out and have fun, because it's a lot about that. And it's also about the community. We have a wonderful community of docents, and we have a lot of fun. We often go out after the event to take some more photos because we didn't have enough time, and we want to see more and document a bit more. So yeah, so just a few photos to share with you guys. And that's it. And now to you, Michael.
Thank you. Pardon me. Thank you, Mirav. Thank you, Deb. Just want to double check that you can still hear me okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
and if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to introduce you, Michael.
Okay.
All right, so Michael Hawk is the founder of Jumpstart Nature, an organization with a mission to catalyze everyone to help the environment. As part of Jumpstart Nature, he produces 2 highly ranked nature podcasts, and I hope you've listened to them: Nature's Archive and the Jumpstart Nature podcast. As a certified interpretive guide, Michael is also an active volunteer, acting as a volunteer docent with Keep Coyote Creek Beautiful, the Santa Clara Valley Open Space Authority, and as a board member of the Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society. Prior to making the leap to nature conservation, Michael worked as a global technical manager at Google. So take it away, Michael.
All right. Thank you so much for that. And I will get my screen share going. So thanks again. And I'm in a hotel room. I hope the Wi-Fi holds up. We did a little bit of testing beforehand. It seemed okay. We will be off and running now. Again, I'm Michael, and today we're going to talk about nature interpretation. But I think nature interpretation for the rest of us doesn't really embody as a title what we're talking about today. So I have a new title, and it's instead, let's talk about creating trophic cascades of nature inspiration. And you might be thinking, what? Yes, we're still talking about nature interpretation, but this is more about sharing our passion for nature. And I'll explain what I mean by trophic cascade here in a moment if you're unfamiliar. Uh, and since you're here, you've already made my job easy because I know that you care about nature. And if you're like most people, you enjoy sharing your love of nature with others. So I probably don't need to convince you too much why it's important to advocate for nature in ways small and large. So, why am I in particular talking about this? So, as Deb just talked about a little bit, my story, maybe it's similar to yours because I don't have an academic background in biology or in communications. In fact, I spent 20 years, and every time I see a photo of myself, yes, I think I'm starting to look that age. But I spent 20 years in tech as an engineer, a manager, and a department head. So I decided to leave my tech job last year to get into conservation full time, trying to carve my own path. And I've started my own organization, Jumpstart Nature. And I'm not going to repeat the different affiliations I have, but I have noticed that as a volunteer with groups like Keep Coyote Creek Beautiful, I spend a lot of time as a science communicator and interpreter. And I through the podcasts I create and videos and hikes I lead and things like that, I've found that you can really make a difference as a communicator and storyteller. And I've learned some ways that are more effective than others. And that's really what I'm going to focus on here today. There's a huge spectrum of techniques and approaches that you can pick and choose from that match your personality and your interests. So while I'm going to talk about some very specific things, I'm going to challenge you to think about how you can make it your own and how you can apply it to yourself. So, my plan is for you to leave the session feeling more confident about turning your friends, family, anyone, random encounters on the trail for that matter, into nature advocates. And if you're good at that already, then I hope you can walk away with some new techniques that you can use. So, what is a trophic cascade? Maybe I was trying a little too hard to be creative there with the new title. So, think about it here for a moment. If we were in person, I would quiz you, but that's a little awkward here in the Zoom. So here's the best definition that I found. Trophic cascades are powerful indirect interactions that can control entire ecosystems. It comes from the idea of trophic levels and how impact at the top of a level can trickle down. And the word trophic, it relates to eating, and you'll see a slide here in a moment. And I'm hoping that you all had a chance to participate in some trophic activity at some point today, and maybe you're doing it right now. I still need my dinner, so I need more trophic activity. But that aside, here's what's meant by trophic levels. You see at the base of this diagram, this is a common diagram that you'll see in ecology books and online. You have photosynthesizers at the base, and they're called producers because they produce the vast majority of energy used by life. And then as you move your way up, you have herbivores and omnivores and so on and so forth. And as a quick aside, ecologists estimate that only about 10% of the energy at each level transfers up to the next level. Now, of course, that's a very rough estimate and it will vary from habitat to habitat. But I wanted to share this today because I think this concept makes for a nice interpretive story. And keep this in the back of your mind when we talk about different things throughout this presentation. When we're showing people things in nature, it helps to make the case for the diversity of native plants. Because when you do that math, less than 1%, it's like 0.1% of the energy makes it all the way up to the top level consumers. So this concept helps show why we need a broad base of plants, as broad a base as possible to support life on our planet. So back on track here, after that quick aside, let's talk about a real trophic cascade. So, who here has heard of the wolves of Yellowstone? It's one of the more famous trophic cascades. It's been in the press in the past. And here's the headline: Gray wolf reintroduction caused streams to reroute and fish to return. But how's that possible? Well, that's the power of a trophic cascade. One thing, one action can have a lasting and far reaching effect. So, to break this specific one down into its parts, in Yellowstone, gray wolves were reintroduced. And this put pressure on the elk that were there. Elk are browsers. So, the elk, without any pressure, could just kind of hang out and do whatever they wanted. And they basically ate up all of the trees along the streams. But when the wolves were introduced, the elk had to move more frequently and stay in protected areas. This allowed willows and aspen and other key plants to come back. That brought insects back, the insects that specialize on those plants. And the combination of the plants and the insects led to bird populations coming back, and you see species richness is starting to improve. And then the beavers returned. And beavers are ecosystem engineers. They now had trees that they could chew down and create dams, creating wetlands and new habitats. So you put this together, this led to uh, amphibians and fish coming back, and literally the stream routes changed because now there were dams and other changes to the flows. So that's a trophic cascade in action. And the result was obviously very far reaching. And to bring it a little bit closer to home, we have a trophic cascade led by sea otters here in California. They're voracious predators of urchins. And without the otters controlling the urchins actually eat up our kelp forests. And the kelp forests support many, many different types of fish and other marine animals. So the sea otters, the lack of sea otters anyway, allows the urchins to come in and decimate those kelp forests. With sea otters coming back, those systems are starting to experience a trophic cascade and an improvement. So we can have a large impact on people downstream. And that's why I chose trophic cascade. We can do something analogous to this. And no, you don't need to be an apex predator to be able to do it yourself. So before proceeding further, I want to learn just a little bit from you. Why are you here? And when I ask why are you here, it's not some existential soul searching inquiry about the meaning of life. It's just why are you attending tonight? And you can type a short answer in the chat if you like. And maybe you're here because you want to lead hikes or other events or make them more engaging. Maybe ideally you want to help out with our BioBlitzes and be a docent or help the Audubon Society with birding field trips or things like that. I gave an in-person version of this presentation to a group a little while ago, a few months ago, and someone said, "I just want to learn to share with my family," and that works too. Those are all valid reasons to be here. So I'm gonna take a look at chat and just see what a couple of the answers are if anyone has answered. I see you leading a BioBlitz moth lighting for City Nature Challenge, teaching elementary school kids, volunteering at Edgewood, great place, taking out families. Yeah, lots of great answers here. I'm not going to be able to read them all. Wow, so many answers coming in. Okay, back to the presentation. So thank you for that. And whatever your reason, these are all opportunities to share and transfer your passion for nature. And when I say transfer your passion, I'm not saying lecture, dictate, but really transfer your passion. So my examples today, they're largely relating to plants and animals, but if you're also interested in geology or restoration or climate or whatever your core interest is, that's all good too. So one thing I'm not going to do is bore you with another how do you create a presentation or how do you create a program uh, type of webinar. That's another topic altogether. So instead, I'm going to focus on the techniques and ideas that you can use. And by the way, some of these will work in presentations too. And I admit it, what I just said, that's a little bit of a lie. If you've ever taken a nature interpretation class, such as Certified Interpretive Guide from the NAI, there are some best practices. Like you want to know what your goal is, what's your theme, how do you assess your audience. Those interpretation classes offer great frameworks to do that. It sounds a little boring, I know, but it's important. And I am going to touch on that just a little bit before we get into the core of the presentation, because I think it's important that we all are on the same page, at least with what it is that we're doing. So having a clear theme and goals is important. And very often, though, it's easy to come up with that because you're inheriting a goal from or a theme from the organization that you're working with. So using Keep Coyote Creek Beautiful as an example, Deb mentioned the mission a moment ago. So I put it here up on the screen so that you can see it. But her organization is bringing communities together to take action for, learn about, play along a healthy Coyote Creek by engaging, educating, and encouraging. And they achieve their mission through lots of different avenues, from creek cleanups to bike rides and the BioBlitz events. If you're unfamiliar with the BioBlitz, it's I would liken it to a nature scavenger hunt where participants go out and they document all the living things that they find, from mushrooms to mammals, insects to irises, whatever you find. And there are different flavors of BioBlitzes, but that's what we do with Keep Coyote Creek Beautiful. People and families come out, they explore, they discover, and they hopefully gain an appreciation of all the living things supported by the Coyote Creek watershed. So the theme kind of writes itself. We want to demonstrate the interconnected importance between us, the creek, and the biodiversity that it supports. Now, of course, you can have secondary goals as well, but we'll keep it simple here for now. And one other quick example I want to give, because I know there's a lot of folks here from the Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society tonight, and probably other bird alliances and Audubon groups. But my local Audubon Society, and as Deb said, full disclosure, I am a board member. But we have a mission to promote the enjoyment, understanding, and protection of birds, other wildlife by engaging people of all ages in birding education and conservation. So if you're leading a bird walk, of course, you'd like to see lots of beautiful birds and show them to your guests. But what's the theme? Is the theme to show as many birds as possible? Well, maybe not. There are many options here. So perhaps you want to highlight the conservation work done by your group, or you want to show how shorebirds rely on a very specific, unique habitat. Or maybe you do just want to show the biodiversity of an area by finding as many species as possible. Just make sure you know what it is, what the goal of your event is. And as you'll see as we continue, having a bigger message, a theme, it creates a deeper meaning to the event, and it will make for a more memorable experience. And that's going to be critical as we go through. So, how's this for a slide? No pictures, just a couple words, but uh, I do feel obligated to cover a couple basic things. You've probably heard a lot of this before, and they may sound like common sense, but it takes awareness and practice to recall a lot of these ideas effectively when you're in the moment of an event. And as I said, some of the techniques we discussed may not work in every circumstance. That's where the art of communication is important. Make it your own, be comfortable with how you like to present things. And it also is helpful to be able to recognize the circumstance in the moment and pull out the right tool from your toolbox. So when I say be aware of your circumstance, you're engaging with a person or people, and think about, like, are you being asked a question? Are you offering assistance? In a BioBlitz, maybe we're finding things and showing things, but your participants may be finding things and asking questions as well. Perhaps you're interjecting in somebody else's conversation or just sharing the joy of something amazing that you just found and you just have to tell somebody else about it. Each of these requires a different approach. Uh, Same thing for working with kids, it's a different approach. Your audience could be a hiker, a family on the trail, your own family member, and the list goes on. Some things might be obvious, like if you see a hiker and it's a 100-degree day and they don't have any water, you can probably assume that they're inexperienced. So you can read your audience a little bit as well and kind of figure out where they're at and what's going on. In that case of the 100-degree hiker with no water, maybe I'm not doing nature interpretation at that point, but offering water instead. Maybe the person you're talking to appears rushed or they have little kids. Again, different approaches. Sometimes you might need to ask a question or two, just like I did of you a few moments ago. And that brings us to number three. Even if your audience is, if they opened up by asking you a question, it it's important to ask the question back and make sure that you're understanding. So this is often called parroting. So you parrot the question back in a slightly different way. And not only are you confirming that you understood, but your audience is going to gain some trust in you that you understood what they said, and you're truly listening. And even if you know your audience really well, you might be surprised about some of the assumptions you make or that they make. And by parroting back, you can get to the root of any maybe miscommunication that could exist. And you're going to avoid patronizing or sounding condescending as well. Something else we're going to talk about tonight is being relevant. So use the information you observed and learned, in the previous steps to customize your engagement and stay on topic. You don't want to turn a question about the velocity of an unladen swallow into a lecture on climate change. And I promise, if you're not a Monty Python fan, this is the only Monty Python reference of the presentation tonight. Okay. But being relevant means more than just answering the question at hand. It means considering the present circumstances and the circumstances of the audience. Now, again, if you're out on a BioBlitz, people are there because they want to be there. But in different engagements, maybe you're working with people who are just struggling to pay the bills. They aren't going to want to hear about your donor program in that case. And someone who's deathly afraid of spiders probably doesn't want to hear how most spiders are actually reclusive or helpful. They just aren't ready for that. So that's meeting people where they're at. So in that vein, if you're dealing with somebody who maybe is super scared of bees, perhaps a more relevant way to get them interested in insects is to start with something like a lady beetle. Uh, you can go from there, ladder up, work your way up to bees. Maybe it's a long-term thing. You may not do it in that one event, but start and show an interesting insect that they could identify with. And you can work your way up maybe to hoverflies next. And I picked hoverflies because they look like bees. It's almost like an exposure therapy, but you can tell them that these beautiful creatures are flies. They don't sting, they pollinate your flowers too. And you can find them in home gardens. And at least here in the Bay Area, they're around almost all year. So it's if you're looking, it's kind of hard not to find them. Now, to be clear, I'm not suggesting that you force this topic on the person who's scared of bees. Use your judgment, take advantage of the happenstance of what you encounter on the trail. And then I want you to be provocative. Yes, that's right. These days, the word provocative maybe is taken to an extreme. You might be thinking of provoking anger or wearing provocative clothing or something like that, but that's not at all what I mean. This is really the definition that you would see in Webster's, and it means to provoke a thought, an action, or a question, a next step. And speaking of next steps, the perhaps one of the most important steps, in fact, is to avoid terminal experiences. And I've been trying to apply these basics I just went through to this presentation so far today. Um, so, what did you think when I said terminal experience? You maybe thought, well, that sounds like somebody's dying, or something like that. And that's actually an example of provocation right there. And I heard this term from my friend Griffith, who's a top tier nature communicator. And we're starting a trophic cascade, right? So this one encounter can't be the end of it. We want it to trickle on down. And that's what I mean here. There are lots of techniques to do this. The main thing is to ensure there's some next step for the person or people that you're working with. There's always needs to be a next step they can take. Remember when I said having an explicit theme or deeper meaning builds memories? That's one element of ensuring there's a next step. So let's try an example. And with this example, I'm going to put Deb on the spot, and we can try to do a little bit of a role play here. So, Deb,
Yeah.
you're there. Okay. So here's what we're gonna do. All you need to do is pretend that you found this leaf that's shown here in the slides. Um, and you notice on the underside, it's an oak leaf. And on the underside, you see these things, these red things. And you notice me wearing a volunteer shirt, or for some reason, you think I know something. I don't know why, but you decide to ask me about it. So go ahead
All
and
right.
take it away.
Hey, Michael, look at this. These are kind of cool. These little pointy cone-looking things under this leaf of a tree that I found. What is it?
Wow, that is really cool. Have you ever seen anything like that before?
No, I've never. First time. Tell me more. I want to know what it is.
Yeah, they're really amazing. I think they're really amazing anyway. I'd like to say that they're created by nature's oldest genetic engineers. And
What?
before I tell you, yeah, go ahead.
What? Genetic engineers? Are you kidding me?
Yeah, before I tell you more, I do have another question for you though.
Okay.
What do you think when you think of a wasp?
Oh, those sting people, don't they? They're kind
Yeah.
of big too. I mean, these are tiny.
Well, you see where I'm going already, and it surprises a lot of people anyway. But these genetic engineers, they're actually tiny wasps. And it's a wasp so small that you might not even see it, and it can't even sting. So, like, when I first learned about these, everything I thought I knew about wasps, I had to throw out. And um, what I find really amazing about these is that these wasps, they've evolved to know exactly when to go to this tree and inject their eggs and some chemicals, and it ends up creating these little growths here. Um, in fact, it's evolved to only be able to do it with this one oak species. And you're probably wondering, like, what's it called? These are called galls, Gall. And there's a wasp larva right now inside of each of those. In fact, maybe multiple wasp larvae in there. And they're eating the plant tissues in that hidden protection. So the reason why I call them nature's oldest genetic engineers is because they're actually influencing the genetic expression of that plant. They've somehow figured this out. They've specialized on this one tree to figure out how to grow its larva in this special protected shelter. And I just find it amazing.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I I hope I see this more. Is there a particular time of year? I mean, right now it seems like there's a lot of them, especially on this one leaf, but is there a particular time of year just for this one wasp gall thing?
Yeah. The well, maybe I'll blow your mind. I don't know, but there are hundreds of species of these wasps and even other insects that can create galls, and they're all specialists. And yeah, in we're pretending right now that it's like late summer or autumn. But yeah, this time of year in late summer or autumn, there are a lot of these around. So as you continue on your hike today, look at the underside of leaves, look at different trees, different oak trees, and maybe you'll see some. And some of them are just amazing looking like this, like cotton candy or starfish or whatever. So check it out, see what you can find.
Cool. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Deb. I'm not going to claim that I'm an Academy Award winning actor, but Deb, you did well. Uh, so let's talk a little bit about what I was attempting to do there. And the very first thing is when somebody finds something or sees something, you really want to be supportive and enthusiastic. So even if I've seen those galls 1,000 times before, I want to capture that moment of discovery uh, as if I was discovering it for the first time. I want to like dig back and remember that memory. And maybe I really truly do still feel that way too. So that's even better still. And I want to call out, I think he might even be here on the call, but Matthew Dodder, he's the executive director of Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society, and he always reminds his field trip leaders about this. So even if the bird you're seeing, you've seen it 1,000 times before, maybe it's even a European starling who's kind of invasive, you don't want to extinguish people's excitement right out of the gate. So, um, you know, yeah, enthusiasm is key.
That's so true, Michael.
um, and next, I tried to be provocative. I said these structures were created by nature's oldest genetic engineers. And if anyone's been on a BioBlitz with me, you've heard me say that. So sorry that wasn't new for you, but I hopefully have some new ways to be provocative here in a couple of slides. This is also a little bit of reframing, and we're going to talk a lot about reframing. It's true. Uh, But perhaps calling them genetic engineers makes them a little more relatable, more memorable for sure. And imagine if I had just said, "Oh, these are wasp galls." Like there's no mystery. And I put a label on it. And for a lot of people, the conversation's over and you no longer have that opportunity to connect. I contextualize the galls in a few ways, telling Deb here how many species there were. I mean, I just said hundreds, but it's an indicator, and how they're all specialists and how this relates to individual plants. A specialist meaning that they can only do specific plants that they've evolved with. And I don't want these experiences to be one-offs. So I offered a challenge, and Deb, you were great because you asked if you could see more. So you were already on that wavelength with me. But even if you weren't, I would have said, check more, look for more leaves. There's some beautiful ones out there. And maybe if I had just seen some, I might say, go look at that tree. You might be surprised what you find at that tree over there. And again, our default behavior might have been just to answer the question with a label. And as I said, it's a missed opportunity. So here's an example for the birders. Maybe you spot a large soaring bird, but you don't have a great look at it. You know, specifically know what it is right away, and it's a turkey vulture. But as a trip leader, you don't just necessarily say, "Oh, look, a turkey vulture." You want to get people looking at it, observing it, get them excited about it. Maybe you tell the group not to identify it because there's always going to be somebody in the group that knows what it is. So ask them, hold back for a moment and ask questions. How's it flying? Is it flapping its wings? Does it look stable as it's flying? Do you see any coloration, any field marks, any patterns? Give them a few seconds to study. And then then you can ask, does anyone know what this is? But there's so many directions you can go with this depending on your theme. So you can ask or describe yourself exactly how you knew it was a turkey vulture or have one of your attendees do that and build upon that. You can tell about why it's there, the wind thermals, or perhaps how important it is to the environment. I call vultures nature's immune system because they consume carrion. Carrion is dead things, and by consuming the carrion, they can actually halt disease spread, which is really fascinating and probably another story all in and of itself. So, what else could I have done in either of those examples? Well, like I said, there's lots of directions I could have gone. I'd be assessing the questions and responses from the people I'm interacting with and if they're enthused or not. If I see people really glazing over, I might cut it short. If they are asking questions, I will give challenges and opportunities to take it further. And if they asked about identification, maybe I could point them to a field guide or a book or an app or a website that has more information. Um, in the case of the galls, I could have said, check out willow trees too, or check out something else. If somebody had a mushroom shirt on, you see a lot of people really into mushrooms these days. I could have said, hey, you know what? Fungi can create galls too. So there's, as I say, so many ways you can go with this. Anyone who's been out on a BioBlitz or a bird hike with me specifically, you might know I have a handful of narratives like this that I use, and I'll use them repeatedly, and I consider them to be my toolbox. Um, there's just so many different things you can talk about. So I consider my toolbox being the things that I feel confident talking about and that are likely to be found. Because on a trip, you never know for sure exactly what you're going to encounter. But if there's a few things that you know that you likely will encounter, you can have those stories in your back pocket to further your theme and further that connection with people. So I have stories for gulls and aphids and turkey vultures and crows, acorn woodpeckers, coast live oak, leaf miners, like all of these things in the Bay Area, you're probably going to find at some point on a hike. And I know with my stories in my toolbox, I know how to connect them to the various themes that we may have, like native plants or Coyote Creek, biodiversity in general, or just inspiring wonder and awe. So I encourage you to develop your own toolbox. Think about the things you really like to talk about as we go through the rest of this presentation. Maybe it's a feather or a nest or a ground squirrel, like who knows? Only you know your passions. I missed my click there, but those are the examples of the things in my toolbox that I like to show when I'm on my hikes. All right, so we're already about halfway through the presentation, and I've jumped into some specific examples. Uh, let's break down some of the techniques now. So reframing, I mentioned reframing a little bit ago, and that's using a different lens. So I called gall wasps genetic engineers. One I really like when we're talking about native plants and biodiversity is ornamental plants. Gardeners talk about planting ornamentals. Uh, that basically means decorations. And thanks to Doug Ptolemy for that great reframing. When you say decorations, people may think of them a little bit differently and recognize that, oh, I'm choosing these plants for how they look and not what their function is. You might call bees vegetarians rather than herbivores. Herbivores sounds a little distant, a little sciency. Vegetarian, maybe just connects a little bit more, something that people can relate to. Mosquitoes could be bat food or bird food. Aphids, I love to call aphids the plankton of the land because there's so many species of aphids out there. And remember that first trophic level slide? They are transferring energy from plants up the food chain, just like plankton does in the ocean. Photosynthesis, eating air and sunlight. Yeah, that's maybe a little bit of a stretch, but it's kind of true. And it definitely is more accessible than photosynthesis. That might actually cause some people to have negative thoughts of biology back when they were in ninth grade or whatever the case might be. So they're eating air and sunlight. And then vultures are nature's immune system. So, do you have any reframing examples that kind of fit in this? I think it would be great if we could all share examples that we might use and how we use them. In fact, all these ones I listed here, feel free to use to your heart's content. We're here to advance nature communication. So, these are not mine, they're not trademarked. Go ahead, use them. So, a common question I have is how can I come up with ways to reframe topics that I care about? Like maybe I don't care about the things that were just listed. And it definitely requires a specific mindset. you can nudge it along by looking at things through different lenses. So, for example, you can flip the perspective. And, you know, I debated on including this example here because it's kind of a little perverse, but a non-nature example is how politicians reframed the inheritance tax to be called a death tax by looking at it from the giver's perspective rather than the receiver's perspective. So that's what I mean by flipping the perspective. And you can use analogies and metaphors, or you can even use synonyms. And I included a couple examples here in the slide as to how I did that. So I'm going to diverge here for a moment and do another example. And the leaf exercise, I heard this on a really popular podcast called Hidden Brain, and I've shortened it here for brevity. So what I'd like you to do as I go through it is imagine going through this exercise as I describe it. And again, I shortened it a little bit, but I think you'll get the point. So you can go to a park or even your yard and pick up a leaf from a tree. And I want you to notice the beauty and the colors, the patterns, the texture, all of the intricate details of that leaf. You can use the one here on the screen if you like. Now pick up a second leaf and notice how the story of the second leaf is similar to, but a little bit different from that first leaf. And then step back and look at the tree and recognize there are thousands of unique, beautiful leaves all on that one tree. And then take a proverbial step back and think of all of the trees in this park, in your neighborhood, in the region, or maybe even massive places like the Amazon. And then consider all of the plants and trees that have lived before you and how they produce the very air that we breathe. And consider all of those leaves, if they were rare, they would be considered works of art. This one leaf, if this was the only such thing in existence on the planet, we would covet it and it would be in a museum. They'd be saved and honored. So recognize that the value of leaves extends beyond the beauty, and it's supplying food and supporting animals. And just because of their ubiquity, we tend to ignore them. We step on them. We don't consider their worth. So now consider the entire planet of leaves and then ask yourself, what kind of world is this that we live in? And you can, if you're doing this exercise, you could jot it down or share with a partner. And when you go through it, it really creates some profound feelings and reflections from people. And I wanted to share this exercise now, anyway, because this whole thing is one of reframing. You walk people through reframing the relationship to a leaf, something that we see all the time. And what it did is it took this ubiquitous object, something you can find almost anywhere, something that exists in uncountable numbers that we take for granted, and made it into something to revel over. And it specifically reframed the leaf as a work of art. That was taking it to a very concrete reframe. And it also reframed the audience, their entire relationship with nature. So this exercise may or may not work for your circumstance. It's an example, but maybe you can use elements of it. Maybe it's just as a good analogy for something else that you care about. So earlier, I contextualized gall wasps by showing how they fit into the world of biodiversity. And I did it very briefly, but I just mentioned how they're specialists. They can only create the galls and uh, support their life cycle on specific plants. So they themselves are also important food to some other insects or birds or other things, or even parasitoids or predators that will eat the galls, or even fungi that specialize in the galls. So they're part of this bigger system. You may not always find galls that may be out of reach, but one of my go-to examples to explain specialists and the food web and biodiversity in general is the monarch butterfly. Most people, I'd wager to say most people, know a little something about the monarch butterfly, and they might know that the monarch relies on milkweed plants. That's all their caterpillars can eat. And when people learn this, it's often mistakenly thought to be a unique trait to monarchs. Like, wow, the monarch, how rare is that? It can only eat this one plant, at least in caterpillar form. But most insects are specialists. So there are other insects that specialize in milkweed too, by the way. And there are predators that can eat monarchs and caterpillars and adults, though some can't because they are somewhat toxic from the milkweed. Monarchs migrate too. So the monarch, not only can you talk about specialists and the food web and why we need all these different plants to support all these different specialists, just like the monarch, but then you can talk about migration and connectivity and why the monarchs need milkweed all along their path, just like birds need, their habitat all along their path, or anybody who's migrating. Um, so there's so many great stories in there. And, this is just an example of how the monarch can be turned into something to tie into to so many different themes. You could just literally say, you might think monarchs are unique, being only able to eat the one plant, but most insects have evolved this way. Plants don't want insects eating them. So the plants are in an evolutionary arms race. They're always trying to one up whoever it is that's eating them. And that's why only certain insects can keep up. So that's one of the stories that you can tell with the monarchs. Okay. So remember when I said avoid terminal experiences? If you have an opportunity, you can lay the groundwork for a continuing journey by building anticipation. So that's something else you can do if you're doing an event like a BioBlitz or a bird walk. Now, you need to be careful, though, not to oversell. Don't be unrealistic. Don't set unrealistic expectations. There's a balance here. So, for example, if you are doing a bird walk, I would avoid setting any expectations about the number of species or the specific birds you might see. No matter how confident you are that a black phoebe always shows up, the moment you say, hey, we're going to see a black phoebe today, that will be the day you don't. So, there are better techniques to build anticipation, like asking questions. Like, do you think we'll see a golden eagle today? You can learn what the people think and how knowledgeable they are. What are you hoping to see today? Just a more open ended one. I still vividly remember taking a raptor ecology class from Ryan Phillips, and he asked everyone in the class to guess how many raptor species we'd see during the trip. And it really helped to manage expectations too. If somebody said, hey, we're going to see 30 raptors today, 30 raptor species, like he knew to say, rein those expectations in that, we probably won't see that many. And there's more. So something that often comes up when talking about connecting people to nature and creating a memorable experience is facts versus stories, which is better. And there's a lot of research that shows that most people, but not everyone, learn and retain more by hearing a story. And, people don't tend to retain an endless stream of facts and numbers. So the narrative helps keep people's attention. But of course, our stories should be factual. We aren't making things up. And some people and personality types do respond to numbers and facts too. So you can integrate them together. Why not both? And uh, I got asked about this in the other presentation. What's the deal with this meme here on the right? It's from a commercial for Old El Paso tacos, and the adults were fighting over whether hard shell or soft shell tacos. And the little girl, of course, had the obvious answer: why not both? So here's an example that attempts to pair a story with facts. And sometimes you might find, someone who thinks that all this talk about nature being good for your health, maybe it sounds kind of new agey or pseudoscience or something like that. And I personally think that highlighting the health benefits of nature is an important tool to get more people to support conservation and preservation. So here's how I might approach that. Now, this isn't a role play. This isn't like the exact way I would talk to somebody in nature. I'm just going to give you some background information and a few elements of how this works. So, when it comes to the benefits of nature, one of the important moments was in the 1980s. There was a surgeon, Dr. Robert Ulrich, who noticed something that his patients who were on one side of the hospital had fewer complications and less pain medication was needed. And even the nurses had fewer negative comments to say about those patients, which to me is a pretty strong indicator of something. And he noticed that the people on that side of the hospital with these better outcomes had a view of nature from their hospital beds, from their rooms, and the people on the other side saw another building. So he devised a comparative study to validate this. Like, well, this is weird. I wonder if it's, the view that somehow is helping here. And anecdotally, through his observational study, it appeared so. How's this possible? So when this came out, more and more people started researching. And in the early 2000s, there was a separate thing that came up. So meanwhile, we have people researching Dr. Ulrich's findings, but then there's all this talk of forest bathing. And forest bathing kind of became a mainstream topic. And it claimed that people who spent time outdoors reported, self reported, better well being. So at this point, lots of people were still skeptical because it kind of flies in the face of a productivity driven office work culture. And terms like forest bathing don't sound very scientific. So here come the facts. So when you're talking about the benefits of nature, and if people are skeptical, you can actually bring in some of these facts. And they are, doctors, first of all, they don't just want to know about outcomes. They want to know about mechanisms, like what is actually happening to cause people to feel this way. So they're able to measure certain things. So through well-designed studies, they found that spending time in nature lowers the stress hormone cortisol. It increases an important immune system cell called a natural killer cell that can stay, you know, elevated for like up to 30 days. I think a lot of people know that spending time outdoors increases vitamin D3 production, and that serves to help with sleep regulation and immune support and bone health and so many other things. Um, there's so many more studies out there that actually take it down to the mechanism level. So if you're trying to make the case for the benefits of nature, you can talk about people's observations, but then you can also say there's hard science that has been measured and repeated that show these things. That's it. That's where the facts would come in. All right. So again, back to avoiding terminal experiences. How do you wrap up? I think the minimum that you should do is guided by this quote from Maya Angelou. Let's pause there so you can read it. So for me today, I hope that people won't forget everything that I say. But even if they do, I want them to walk away feeling good and associating the experience with good memories. You want them to feel excited, feel like they discovered something, not that you told them something, but they discovered something, and feel like they have a path forward. And as you're wrapping up, you want to explicitly outline next steps they can take. So find a way to create a follow up in some way. Pardon me. Maybe ask the person, what are you going to tell your hiking buddies about this, or your office mates at work, or whatever the case might be. Uh, or like before, you could set a challenge to find more of something, more birds, more galls, whatever the case might be. When you go home, identify the first bird you see, or something like that. Or offer to answer questions offline, give them your email address, suggest an upcoming field trip or hike. Your organization probably has a website, whoever you're representing, if you are representing somebody. You could invite them to that. And if you were leading an event for someone like Keep Coyote Creek Beautiful, or the Audubon Society, or your own thing, maybe consider setting up a more formal follow-up or recap session. You want to make it fun. Maybe you want to have some awards to attract people. It's hard to get people to come back, so this doesn't work for every situation. But you could have an award for the best photos, or the most interesting find from the event, or something like that. And there'd be a chance, say through Zoom, you make it easy for people to review the stories from people, answer questions, help identify things, and then also have that fun and community building experience. So let's recap here some of what we went through. One is context. You want to start off really understanding their context, circumstances of the audience, ask questions, be relevant, be provocative, reframe when possible, contextualize things. So again, that's making it relevant through different ways. build anticipation, and avoid terminal experiences. Now, one thing that I've used the word several times tonight, but I haven't explicitly called out, probably the most important thing for you to do is be passionate. uh, Passion is the essential ingredient, and people pick up on that. When you're enthused, when you're excited, when you really want to share, when you're engaging authentically with people, they're going to, back to the Maya Angelou quote, they're going to remember that and they're going to walk away feeling really good about the event. So, something that I wanted to include here, even though we're on Zoom, but this works best in person, is to actually practice a little bit. You can practice with a friend or a partner the next time you're out in nature. Do this, but what you'll do is pair up, and one person will be a presenter, another person will be a listener, and pick a subject, something that you're familiar with. You don't want to pick something random. And remember, it's your toolbox. So think about what you want in your toolbox that you want to talk about. And no need to role play, but actually go through it and create a story, create some connection to get your partner as excited about that thing as you are, and see how it goes. And get feedback from your partner and flip the script and have them do it for you as well. I think it's worthwhile exercise. It only takes a few minutes, and you can, practice before you're in the heat of the moment in an actual event. So when we were in person, I gave some photos of some things that maybe could be a starting point. Maybe this gives you a few ideas as well. All right, so it's a newer presentation. I've given it once in person, but I'm really passionate about this topic. So I'm curious as to how this worked out here over Zoom. I would love your feedback. My email address is here on the screen, michael@jumpstartnature.com. So let me know what I could do to make it better. You can let me know right now if you want. But if you have any questions as well, feel free to reach out. I'm also working on a bunch of different things for Jumpstart Nature, in addition to helping the other organizations I mentioned. So we have a lot of unique ideas to reach people and apply our communication skills and really catalyze people to make a difference for the environment. If you're interested in learning more, please reach out to me. I could use your help in any way you can offer it. And as Deb mentioned, I have a couple of podcasts too that I invite you to listen to. One is more interview based. It's called Nature's Archive. I don't put all of these skills to practice in Nature's Archive because it's a little more conversational. But Jumpstart Nature is a narrative, and I have a partner who is the host of that. But we try to put a lot of these skills to practice through an audio podcast format. So I invite you to listen to that as well. So with that, I will go ahead and stop sharing, and we can have a discussion, and I can attempt to answer any questions perhaps that you may have.
That was great, Michael. Thank you so much. We do have some questions. They were in the chat. And hi, Michael. Great talk. I'm curious about how you would suggest keeping the interest for participants who already know the answers. I love leading trips for both beginners and more experienced birders, but the techniques for engaging those audiences are different. I have a few thoughts, but I'm wondering what you would suggest. It's so important to gauge our audience, whoever it is.
Yeah. So one thing that in the beginning, like if it's a formal hike, I very often do introductions, and this is like what the certified interpretive guide type of classes talk about. So in the introduction phase of a formal event, um, it's good to go around the group and pick up a little bit on like what people's backgrounds and experiences are. And if somebody indicates that they're an experienced birder, for example, maybe you can lean on them and get some help from them and engage them in the hike as well. Now that might not work if your goal is to go find, if it's a big day or something, you're trying to find as many bird species as possible. That's a totally different theme, and uh, you may have to set expectations a little bit differently in that circumstance. But in a general purpose hike, I would try to lean on those more experienced people and have them lend a hand, or maybe if they're open to it, put them on the spot occasionally. Like, how did you know? Like, could you help here? And that can keep them engaged. I'd be interested to hear what Matthew does, though.
Sure. Matthew, feel free to unmute yourself. And if you want to share your screen.
Yeah, Michael, those are absolutely great suggestions. I was thinking about experienced birders that I had not met before, sort of newcomers. And I think the idea of asking them to share their experiences would help draw them into the group. And I might learn something from them too. That's it's a real possibility. So those are great suggestions. And anyway, I've loved this presentation. I think it's you've got some wonderful advice for all of our naturalists, all of our leaders. So anyway, thank you.
Thank you.
And Michael, one of the questions you asked was related to making some comparisons that are relatable. So also at 7-Eleven, there's Robert Hall says, robins are flying burritos. I thought that one was really great. Andrea, galls, leaf miners, cryptic or hidden organisms, secret biodiversity. California scrub jay equals California screaming jay. Erica Bruce says, I've heard nudibranchs called the butterflies of the ocean. Daphne says, global climate change equals fever for the earth. Zoe, yellow-rumped warblers is butterbutts. At 7:28, Brian asks, any advice on the best ratio of experienced to novice participants on a BioBlitz? What if 50 people show up?
Well, I have to say I'm very thankful to be part of Deb's and Mirav's BioBlitzes because they have it down to a science, and there are a number of docents that tend to show up. So I've never been in that situation where I've had to lead a group of 50 people. I'm probably not the best to give advice for very large groups. But in terms of what I've experienced with Mirav and Deb, and maybe Mirav, if you want to jump in with your perspective, that would be great. But my experience has been that groups of 5 or 6 tend to be pretty good. And similar to Matthew's question, if someone's experienced, you find a little bit out at the beginning about what they want to look for and what they're experienced in, and you can ask them to help out with the group as you go through that. And similarly, we don't know, as Marav said at the beginning, we don't know everything. Nobody knows everything. So sometimes you need that help from the other participants with their collective backgrounds and experiences. Marav, did you want to add anything?
Sure. So to beginning with the end, I totally agree. Like I would lean on other people's experience. I usually say, well, I'm not a birder. I don't know the birds. And if I have a birder with me, then it's awesome. But if one of the participants, I noticed that, they seem to know what they're doing, I'd ask them, like, are you a birder? Could you help out with, oh, do you identify that call? Because I can't identify bird calls. I'll also use apps, actually. I use Merlin, which, is not 100% great, but it's pretty amazing. So I would use that. But I'll also be very frank about my abilities to identify things. And I think as long as you say upfront that, you don't know everything and that these are great questions. And this is like when we document what we see is just the beginning of our interaction with that species, because later on we might get an identification. But on our walk, we might just say, oh, well, that's a very interesting plant. I'm not really sure, what it is. Or maybe you could say more than that. I might not know the name of that species of bird or insect, but I might be able to say something about their interaction with other species around them, like their place in that ecosystem. And about the first questions about like how to plan the BioBlitz, what we do, so there are many different ways how you can plan and organize a BioBlitz. The way we do it is we'd like people to walk with a docent or two. So we try to limit the size of the group. We have Eventbrite event pages set up, and we limit the number of people that can sign up, and we always monitor the number of docents that we have. And if we see that we have more docents that are going to come, then we'll release more tickets. So we'll have a wait list for the people that, didn't make it at first. But then hopefully, as we're getting closer to the event, maybe we're able to secure a few more docents, and then we can release more tickets. But we do try to make it, small enough so that we are able to host these small teams. I think they're very important for our experience. But there are many different ways to organize a BioBlitz, and people would often just set up a time and place, and the participants would just kind of know the boundaries of that park and go and do their own thing, and that's awesome too. And one last thing, our participants would also often, walk with a group, but then maybe leave the group and join another group or just do their own thing, and that's fine too. It's kind of open and flexible in a way.
So some of that management happens on the front end with the system you use for people signing up and managing that way too. So that makes a lot of sense. And I realized something as you were talking, avoiding terminal experiences for BioBlitzes and using iNaturalist, it's almost built in, because if you don't know something, it's, the answer is, well, let's document it. And you have this amazing worldwide community of experts who are going to look at your observation and help with an identification. You might get some feedback. So it's a good reminder to people, like that's part of the goal here is let's get feedback from a whole community of experts. So check back in on iNaturalist in a couple of days, and you might be surprised at the help you've received from strangers around the world.
Yeah, and I actually like saying, well, I don't know what that mushroom is, but hopefully there's a mushroom expert here in California or on the other side of the globe that would look at your observation and tell you what it is.
Mm-hmm.
And with the birds, you might actually get an answer within just a few minutes. Someone will look at your observation and tell you what it is very quickly.
So Michael, I wanted to tell you how much I'm enjoying this conversation. And there's something you said earlier about personal enthusiasm for the subject that really communicates with attendees on a trip. I think after the trips I've led, I've found nothing is more compelling to attendees than your own enthusiasm. And I've always said that as an experienced leader, even if you have a day with very few birds, you're going to turn it around and express it to the attendees as if it were the most wonderful day that you ever had. And finding something remarkable to talk about, summarizing the trip when you're done, helping people remember what they've seen. But that enthusiasm for a leader to speak to attendees on a trip or a BioBlitz or whatever is more powerful than almost anything, I think. But anyway, I just wanted to emphasize that because it's been so important to me as a leader.
I might steal a couple of those bullet points and add them to the next revision of this presentation. So thank you, Matthew.
Corey Thinker says, can you say more about what being provocative means?
Yeah, so the being provocative is basically provoking a thought, a next step, some kind of follow-on action. So it ties into the idea of avoiding a terminal experience. So it's basically you're trying to get someone to take the next step and avoid giving simple answers that terminate the conversation. So some of the examples of being provocative was positioning and reframing, and like reframing things as nature's oldest genetic engineers. Like that was an attempt to be provocative. And even using the term terminal experience was an example of being provocative. I feel like, I'm sorry if I'm not giving you new information here. Hopefully that helps, but I can try again if that didn't quite meet your or answer the question for you.
Any advice on framing questions about invasive species? Sometimes these plants are admired, and we'd love to be able to explain why we're removing them without discouraging their interest.
Yeah, I think that's a really good one. I should create some better narratives in my own toolbox for that. So the default thought I have is you don't want to, if someone is really excited about a certain plant like mustard, and how we get these fields of yellow here in California, you don't want to come right out of the gate and say, "Oh, it's terrible invasive species." So you start with some common ground, and it's like, "Oh yeah, it is a yellow. It's a beautiful flower. Look at that. Look at how dense they are." And you can start to ask the questions of, what do you know about it? Do you know what it is? Do you know how it got here? And you can ease your way into that discussion, but you can admit that it's still beautiful. Like, that's totally okay. Um, but it's probably important to start that discussion of, however, there's there's a deeper story here, there's a bigger story here, and invasive, you get into the invasive species discussion through that avenue.
Marav, did you want to add a little bit more? You wrote a
Yeah,
comment.
I wanted to add a couple of things. So first, I think, some of them are beautiful, or they smell, amazing, or, there's something about them. What I often say is that, like, oh yeah, some of these plants are actually even useful for wildlife. If you look at yellow star thistle, it's a terrible weed, but birds use the seeds, and many pollinators use the flowers. So often I'll start a conversation with looking at that aspect, and maybe say, I guess yellow star is not star thistle is not a good example, but I might say, well, some people like it. But what are the issues? Like, oh, do you see how it grows and makes this crazy stand that we only see that plant? It takes over. It requires a lot of resources. It takes over. It competes with other plants, as much as um, and then you could say that there are some programs to remove invasive species, and again, as much as but if I don't know much about the problems, maybe I'll say, oh, but this is why we want to grow native plants, because of what you said about the insects, that they are so specific to their plants. And if we want to have a higher diversity of insects, we have to have that diversity of plants, because they each require their own specific plant. And many native plants support many insects. So by planting a native yard, then you promote all these different species in a city or in the park or in different places. So it could take you to lots of different good places, I think. It could be a great conversation starter to talk about conservation. And you could take it to plants or birds or ants, which is important, or anything else that you feel a bit more comfortable with, right? It's like, oh, I know a little bit about the plants, so maybe I can talk about that.
Something I was just going to add real quick, and this is probably beyond the scope of this presentation, but yeah, I do encounter people at times where we have an invasive species like a plant, and they will comment like, "Oh, I've seen a certain, like a hummingbird, nectaring on it, or some other species using it." And that's another opportunity to ask questions, because some people will see that and they think it's beneficial to the food web, and you can ask what they know about that, and then as you said, Marav, start to talk about, well, that's an exception. There are a few generalist species out there that can use this plant, but the vast majority can't. And you can, again, I'm being very brief here in this response, but it's important to understand what the person asking the question knows, so then you can tailor that response too.
Yeah, and you can even, just start a conversation. What do you think? Okay, so we have the pros and cons, like someone was just writing in the comments. We know that we have these problems, we have these benefits. Sometimes the native plants are gone. Nobody's going to do any restoration there. So maybe we want to have the benefit of some nectar flowers in the middle of the summer, like we get from yellow star thistle. It's pretty uncommon for our native plants. And maybe they're gone from that area. So you could start a discussion, because it's not black or white, right? It's like there might be something in the middle. Maybe we need to have some of these plants around until we can do a restoration project and introduce something else that would provide those resources.
Mm-hmm. Yep, nature's a spectrum. There are very few things that are all or nothing.
So Michael, Robert Hall asks, how do you handle questions you don't know without making it terminal? And Marav alluded to using iNaturalist or
Uh-huh.
Merlin, but can you share your ideas?
Yeah, I mean, those are great ideas. If you don't know, just kind of repeating a little bit of what Mirav said, you admit you don't know, but maybe one opportunity would be to say, like, let's say it's a gall or it's a bird or it's a mushroom. There's some resources that I know about that somebody could use. Like say, well, I don't know, but I know what I'm going to do when I get home. I'm going to get on the golfformers.com website and learn about what this thing is. And if the other person saw, maybe I'll have them send me the photo and I'll send, or exchange email addresses, something like that, where we can uh try to investigate it. Now, of course, with iNaturalist, that's all kind of built in, so the answer there is put it on iNaturalist, and I'll take a look at it, and maybe some other people will help, and we can exchange, and continue the experience there. um, every situation is going to be different. I don't have a blanket answer, and that's like kind of where the art um, of the circumstance comes in.
And it takes practice. So, you develop that muscle over time, and also learning as you go, which has happened for me by hanging out with you guys. Erica asks, any recommendations on where to become a certified interpretive guide? And there are different versions of and organizations that certify. Can you and Michael, talk about some of the options that you have? One person here, Christine, indicated the Interpnet for NAI for certified
Yeah.
interpretive guide. Are there others?
Yeah, the NAI Interpnet is their web domain name, but I think it's National Association for Interpretation. They're probably the leader, at least in the United States, for this type of training. They have a certification called Certified Interpretive Guide, and different groups will present that. They have another training called Certified Interpretive Host, which is similar but different, that people might be interested in. There are a variety of like naturalist centric courses out there that really doesn't get in. They don't tend to get into the interpretation too much, but they're adjacent. I think adjacent to this answer, and that would be like California Naturalist, but that's really deep into the naturalist side of things. And Santa Clara County Parks has a neighborhood naturalist program, and you have to do a presentation as part of that. So you put some interpretation to practice. So if you're in Santa County, that's an opportunity. So that's pretty much what I know of. There are some universities that offer courses in this as well. I think University of Wisconsin Stevens Point has a course. So if you start digging around, there's probably other options out there too.
I did the California Naturalist program through grassroots ecology a few years ago, and I thought it was really nice. It actually gave me that confidence to get started with the BioBlitz program. It actually made me addicted to iNaturalist, so watch out. But but then once I learned that, I learned more about community science, and I got the confidence to actually start on the groups and do all these different things. So I thought it was very useful, and through that program, you also need to do a little project and present that to the class. So
Right.
you get a little bit of that too.
I see one here. Are there CIG trainings specific to certain environments like marine interpretation? CIG is more agnostic of the type of content. When I took the class, I could pick some topics of my own to focus on. But if you're looking like specifically for marine environments, that might actually be like if you're in California, a California naturalist opportunity. Different groups put on California naturalist training sessions, kind of specific to where they're located, and you might be able to find coursework that is specific to marine environments. And like Marav alluded to, that can build your toolbox. It will give you the confidence, and you'll start to learn about the systems and how they work. And if you take that class with interpretation in mind as you're taking it, then you can probably accelerate building that toolbox. Do you have a pacing or cadence in mind when you're giving a walk? Do you go with the flow, or do you have planned stops? In the case of a BioBlitz, maybe we'll have one or two interesting things I know about from my experience of attending a location. If you have the time, I always recommend um, scouting your location before you do it for the first time. Um, and then that way I do have something in my back pocket that I know, oh, there's this really cool valley oak over here that has nesting house wrens in it, or whatever the case might be, and I can make sure that that's a stop. Um, in terms of pacing and cadence, some of it too, if you're, for example, if you're hiking in a really difficult terrain, it's steep, you want to make sure you're giving people a break. So I'll look at the terrain and be like, okay, people are going to need a break about here halfway up the hill. So what can I talk about, halfway up the hill to give people a break and still make it interesting and have them catch their breath. So you start to incorporate the actual terrain of the environment. Um, in general, though, like with a BioBlitz, it's really dictated by what we find. And one of the expectations I set on a BioBlitz is uh, we're going to have a lot of interruptions today because people are going
Squirrel.
to be finding
Sorry.
things. Yeah, exactly like that. Maybe we're talking about that really cool gull, and then suddenly a golden eagle flies over. It's like, yeah, we're going to get distracted by that golden eagle. So BioBlitz can be very different in that respect. Um, but in general, if I'm leading a docent hike for Open Space Authority, I am going to have a couple of stops along the way that match up with the theme, of that hike that I will have pre-planned.
And Marav, do you go to many of the locations ahead of time and seasonally find out what we have? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I try to do pre-hikes to the places we're going to visit, and often, we come back to the same location year after year, season after season. So we already have our favorite valley oak with the awesome plant galls, or an area in the lake where we like to scoop different creatures from the lake and see who lives in there. So we'll have, a few ideas of what we want to do and maybe have some tools for that. So I'll have my aquatic nets and I'll have some trays, and I have a big tray where I shake vegetation above a little plastic tray and look for different creatures on that. So I'll have a few things that I want to do depending on the season. If it's winter, I'll look closely for slime molds and mushrooms and maybe salamanders and snails. So I'll have a few things in mind, but it's a good balance between that and squirrel, or a bird, or something that we hear, or something that we see. And I try to see what other people are looking at, because sometimes people would be documenting something and they might share that or not, but like maybe we all want to see whatever that was. Yeah. So I see that there's a question about BioBlitzes.
So a BioBlitz, the short answer is I tend to call it a nature scavenger hunt, where you are looking for kind of like all things biology. So any organism, it could be mushrooms, mammals, birds, plants, insects, you name it. And that's the style of BioBlitz that Marav, I'm kind of speaking for you, that you often lead. Though I will say, to have a more complete answer, some people will have more focused BioBlitzes sometimes, like the primary focus might be on one category of organisms or something like that. And then the goal is to go out, find these things, and document them. And our choice of documentation is usually iNaturalist, taking a picture with your phone and putting it on iNaturalist. But even if you don't want to do that, just going out there and finding things and observing and being part of the event is still a great opportunity to learn. So Marav, did you want to fill in my gaps?
I think that's basically it. So the idea is to document, species, but I guess the other part of the question was, how can you get involved? So if you're local, please join us. We'd love to have you. And I can explain about that. But if you're not local, there might be groups in your area that organize BioBlitz events. So in the South Bay, what we do is I organize BioBlitz events mostly with Keep Coyote Creek Beautiful, but also with other organizations such as Santa Clara Valley Audubon Society and others. And you can find information about that on my website, BioBlitz Club. And we'll share the information at the end of the event with everyone. What else? And then you could sign up for one of the events. You could join as a participant and let us know that you're interested. Maybe you'd be interested in becoming a docent. If you are, I would suggest that you'd come and join one or a few events. And again, let us know that you're interested and see what it's like, see what the docents do, what would be your role, and then basically join us. And I mean, if you're interested, you could become a docent as well. That's what I want to say. Which I guess is why we're doing these presentations, right? Because we want to empower people to feel like, yeah, they could do that too.
Mm-hmm.
I wanted to, I mean, first of all, say I'm just so excited to be part of these wonderful presentation. And one of the things I wanted to mention is how much we naturalists, we biologists, we scientists, how little we know. And in a way, the excitement and the passion could be contagious. And that's kind of like what we're relying on. We want more educators. We want more children to love nature. We want the office people to be in love with wanting to get out there and just knowing and just being able to, like, I think the excitement of maybe we'll find things that we do not know. Maybe we'll find the new species, the new kind of mushroom that nobody's seen before. And I think that's something worth looking for when we're out there, you know?
I love that. And that works really well. Because you're right. And I think like just, kind of an opinion from me is there is a large segment of society that doesn't want to admit that we don't know things. And I think by making it okay to admit that you don't know things is a really good way to bring people along for the ride. And it's true. Everything you said is true. There's a chance that we're going to discover something that has never been seen before. So that's a great way to pull people in.
Yeah, I love telling people that I don't know what we're going to find. That's why we do it, because, it's always exciting. And we often find unexpected things that, we go to a park that we've visited so many times before and we still find new things. And, it's so interesting. And it's interesting to see the seasonal differences. And it's interesting to see what our creek. So we walk a lot along Coyote Creek. So what does it look like in a pretty clean area? What does it look like downtown San Jose? How different is it, and why is it that way? Why are these organisms here and not there? And these are part of the things that we would mention.
Yeah, thank you so much for that. I might include that too more explicitly in the presentation. So I think that's a great way to pull people in.
All right. Well, since I don't see any more questions and don't have anybody unmuting, thank you, everyone, and we'll call it a night.
Thank you.